Jai Hind, Namaste, hello, and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav, and in this video, we'll be discussing the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 8th of November 2020. Now, free PDFs are available for selected topics on our Telegram channel, the link to which is in the description. Also, I have added timestamps in the description, so if you want to skip to a particular news, please use those timestamps. And please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos that we post. Also, please give us a thumbs up if you like this video. So without wasting your time, let's get started. So starting with the Hindu, Joe Biden elected 46th president of the United States. So finally it has happened, but still Trump is trying to file some cases. Let's see if the Supreme Court entertains him. And then there are going to be problems in the transition to power because Trump still has some days left in the office. Then India successfully launches Earth Observation Satellite EOS-1. So let us see what this is about. So an Earth observation satellite or a Earth remote sensing satellite is a satellite that is used for Earth observation from orbit, including spy satellites and similar ones for non-military uses such as environment monitoring and meteorology. So basically this satellite enables us to get high resolution pictures in all weather conditions, right? And this satellite is very useful. Now what are the uses? It is used for mapping and monitoring of land and forest resources, weather and climate, and geospatial contour mapping. Now which technology is it using? It is known as synthetic aperture radar, which gives all weather high resolution images, and it uses X-band radar that uses low wavelength, and these wavelengths can be varied, and depending on those wavelengths you can get different prospects about the land. You can get pictures of military installation, or you can get pictures of mineral resources. Basically you can change the resolution and the level of penetration, right? Now about this EOS-1, it is another RISAT satellite, which is radar imaging satellite. That is why RISAT. It will work together with RISAT-2B and RISAT-2B-R1 launched last year, and this is the third of the 3 spacecraft constellation. So now we have completed the constellation. Very important application for defense purposes. It will give all weather round the clock service for high resolution images. Now with EOS-1, ISRO has also moved to a new naming system for Earth observation satellites, which till now has been named thematically according to the purpose they were meant for. For example, Cartosat. So from the name Carto, you can understand that this was about mapping, cartography. OceanSat, so about oceans and seas. Then there were INSAT, RISOSAT, etc. They were named differently for specific jobs or for the different instruments that were on board of these satellites. So this is all about it, right? Then page 7, 4 more biodiversity heritage sites for Karnataka. So the State Diversity Board has passed the resolution. Now these are the sites, right? The names are not that important. What you should know right now is what is biodiversity heritage site. They are considered unique and fragile ecosystems that can be marine ecosystems, coastal and inland waters, or terrestrial areas. Now this is also telling us about the importance of these different sites. You can read this on your own. Now on page 8, months after starting Chhabha rail project without India, Iran seeks help. So we have discussed in the past how important the Chhabha project really is for India, its strategic importance. Then how Iran locked us out because we could not go ahead with investments and construction. Why? Because of US sanctions, right? Then we also saw that ahead of 2+2, US gave us some leverage as to the development of this Chhabha project and this whole rail project. We've been discussing how through Chhabha, then Dilaram Zaranj, India wants to access not only Iran and Afghanistan, but also Central Asia. So that is the importance of this project. Now Iran is again seeking our help. So let us look at it. So it would seek our help for phase 2 for equipment. Iran has also activated a $150 million line of credit that we had earlier given to them. Now why was India locked out? Now these are important reasons. Now in 2016, our IRCON signed an MOU with Iran, right? And it also did inspection and feasibility, site inspection and feasibility. But then there was this company, Khatam Al Anbar, which was involved in the construction activities. But this is under US sanctions. Why? Because it has close links with the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Committee. So that is why we could not go ahead with this construction, right? Now about the status of this project, 60% of track laying has been completed. 50% of the total project has been completed, and Iran is projecting that by 2021, they will be completing the whole project. So see, this is the project, Chhabha, rail line, then Zaranj, and Delaram, and then Garland Highway. So it is a network of rail lines and roads. Not only would it provide us access to Iran and Afghanistan. Afghanistan is very, very important because Pakistan does not let us go through its territory. We need access to Afghanistan, right? And through Afghanistan, then we can also access Central Asia. That is the whole plan. Again, there are two ports of departure, Mumbai or Kandla, then Chabar. This is Zehadan, Zaranj highways, and then whole this road, right? And this is the Central Asian region. So the Chabar port Shahid Beheshti terminal is already being jointly operated by India and Iran. So that is a success. Now, what are the irritants? Number one, Trump's maximum pressure policy, which has taken a toll on our Farzad B oil field, for which we had also made successful bids. But now that project is also in the limbo, and the Chabar project. Now there's also a shadow of China-Iran deal we've been discussing, $400 billion deal for the next 25 years. And China is also looking to invest in the projects where we are interested. Chabar, Farzad B oil fields, and there's also a Makaran Coast FTA that is coming up, and there China is trying to make inroads. So these are the irritants between our relations, right? Then on page 10, UAE is set to overhaul Islamic law. So let us see. So UAE is going to overhaul its Islamic personal laws by allowing unmarried couples to cohabitate, loosening restrictions on alcohol, and criminalizing so-called honor killings, which is a very good step for women's rights. Now, why is UAE doing so? UAE is home to a large expat community, right? And it is also trying to shift itself from the petrodollar economy. So these are the broad reasons. So why is it doing so? Number one, it wants to change its image, wants to project its image as a westernized destination for tourists, fortune seekers, and businesses, to boost social and economic standing in the world, and also to consolidate UAE's principles of tolerance, which would send green signals or good signals throughout the world, and there would be more investment, more tourism. And these were the main irritants in tourists and businesses coming to the UAE. So they are overhauling their laws. Then page 11, future moves, High Court on SIAC's Amazon order. We've been discussing that in detail. So just the latest development. Then just the headline, economy expected to bounce back next fiscal. Let us hope that it really happens. Then SEBI allows new fund category. Let us see which is that category. Now this category is called Flexi Cap, and it gives investors freedom to invest freely across stocks, large cap, mid cap, and small cap. Under this fund, investors would have to invest a minimum of 65% of total assets in equity. So a minimum of 65% in equity. It could be large, mid, or small, irrespective of its nature, right? And it has also allowed the fund houses to rename existing schemes to the new category. So this is about the new fund category, Flexi Cap. Then again, just the headline, China's October exports surge, imports rise. But again, phase 2 lockdowns are going on in Europe. So its growth could again take a hit. Then page number 12, science and tech. Ancient skeleton offers clues on prehistoric era. The severely eroded teeth indicate a fiber-rich grain diet. So they have found a skeleton of a prehistoric woman more than 5,000 years ago. She used to live in the Neolithic period. So a period more than 5,000 years ago basically is Neolithic period. She's called the Lady of Bitikau, right? Now she was between 30 and 45 years and died more than 5,000 years ago. Now it was during the Neolithic period that humans first introduced grain into their diet, since they could be stored more easily than meat and could also be used as means of payment, right? So again, a new thing you're getting to know. Yesterday or day before yesterday, we discussed how they were hunters, women hunters, right? So new findings we are getting to know about our own history, right? And hunting gathering has been the longest period in our history. And throughout that period, women were hunters and they probably enjoyed the same status in the society. So now what we are experiencing in society is not what was in the past. However, this led to a deterioration in people's general health. This can be seen in the state of Lady Bitikau's teeth, which are severely eroded and missing completely in some places. So this is just about it, Lady Bitikau. Then very, very important, lessons from Ladakh's glacial lake outburst. Now this is important for your paper 1, geography, right? And again, paper 3, disaster management. Very important topic, very important concepts. So let us look at them. So first, it tells us that in August 2014, a glacial lake outburst, flood hit the village of Gya in Ladakh, and the lake was also called Gya. It destroyed houses, fields, and bridges. Now, what were the causes? It was not because of spillover. Spillover is like when you put water in a bucket and the bucket overflows. But it was because of tunnel drainage effect, which is akin to a bucket having holes at the bottom and water flowing out of these holes, right? So the reason was tunnel drainage effect. It could be a question in your mains as well. What is tunnel drainage effect? So the flooding did not happen due to spillovers, due to avalanche or landslides, because what happens, for example, this is a lake. Now an avalanche or landslide happens, it deposits debris in the lake and then its volume rises, water level rises, and then a spillover happens, right? But this was not the cause. Rather, there was thawing of ice cores in the moraine. Now moraine is basically a large field which is formed by the slow movement of glaciers, right? For now, you just know this. It is a large field which is formed by slow movement of glaciers, and then there are moraine lakes, which are basically depressions and where the melting water of glacier gets deposited. So those are known as moraine lakes. So those moraine lakes also overflow, right? So a field of dirt and rocks that have been pushed along by glacier as it moves, which drain through the subsurface tunnels. So again, within a glacier, there are subsurface tunnels and they were leaking the water, and that led to this flood. Then he talks about future, that more of this moraine thawing of ice cores would happen or would accelerate due to global climate change, right? So there is an urgent need to use multiple methods for better risk assessment and early warning. Now he says not all such events would lead to disasters. What would lead to disasters? What are the factors? Number one, urban planning. If it is haphazard, then there would be a disaster. Number two, size of lake. Number three, the distance between the village and the lake. The closer it is, the more vulnerable the village would be. Then the valley section, that is whether there are deep valleys or are they shallows, they would determine how fast and how far the water would flow. And others like cloud burst, Kedarnath floods that we saw, right? Because there was a cloud flood and again there was a glacial lake and that over flooded, and because of that there was spillover and that flooded the downlying regions. Now he says that there have been differential attention regarding this. In the central Himalayan region, including Sikkim, it is taken as a major risk, and recent attention has been paid in the arid trans-Himalayan regions of the Ladakh, right? Because of the recent changes. So he says that we need to analyze lake volumes, and it is important to regularly monitor lake development and dynamics because these problems are just going to rise. So this is about your moraine thawing and also its capacity for disaster. Then this one, soak in the sun, sleep early and try to avoid myopia. So this is very, very good article. Again, this is very, very important for your mains examination this year, next year, or 2-3 years down the line, because because this problem has been rising and this is because of lifestyle changes, right? So he gives very good analysis about this problem. Let us look at it. So rising cases of myopia, he says that myopia or short-sightedness is turning out to be an epidemic across India and indeed even more in Southeast Asia. Now, first of all, what is myopia? This is also called short-sightedness. What really happens? That how you process image, when you see something, light goes through your lens and then it converges at a point on your retina, right? And from this, the nerve endings, they go to the brain, and those signals are processed by brain and calculated as an image. So that is how you see things. It is just like a computer, right? So in case of normal vision, this would happen, right? You would see a strawberry and you would know clearly that it is a strawberry. But in case you have nearsightedness or myopia, what would happen? That the image or the light would not converge at your retina, but some point ahead of it. So what would happen? The image that the retina would send to the brain, it would be a blurry one and your vision would be impaired. So this is known as nearsightedness or myopia, and it basically happens because your lens shape, it gets misshaped. Now there are many reasons: birth defects, genetic defects, and now there are many lifestyle problems and social issues that are leading to this. So let us look at them. So he has categorized the causes into 3 broad categories. Number 1, natural, which is about your family history and genetics. Then number 2, please pay attention, social, and this is very, very relevant in countries of South Asia and more so in India. Children have intense educational pressure, they have excessive homework, and they also have to attend coaching classes. So what really happens? They don't go out and that robs children of sunlight. Now we'll also understand the importance of sunlight for your eyesight, right? Now, what are the lifestyle problems? Because of urban living, again, congested living, we don't get proper exposure to sunlight. Then prolonged near work. Near work means that you have screen right in front of your face. Then less exposure to sunlight. And then there's new research about sleep. People sleep late, they have short sleep, and the quality is overall poor. And this disturbs our circadian rhythm. It is the rhythm of our body, natural rhythm of waking up and sleeping, right? And if that rhythm is disturbed, it disturbs your other biological processes. So it disturbs the circadian rhythm of the body, particularly the brain, and also it strains the retina. And then he says this COVID-19 has been adding to this problem. Why? Because more and more children are going for online classes and they're glued to their devices and they're not going out. So whatever limited sunlight exposure they were getting, they're not even getting that exposure these days because of COVID. Now, what is the role of sunlight? We've been discussing sunlight. So it protects against myopia. How? So if you're in an open space and not performing any near work is screen in your face, the stress on your eye is reduced, number one. Number two, outdoor environment provides equal optical stimuli to various parts of your peripheral retina and enables exposure to different colors. And this enhances your vision and does not weaken your vision, right? Then there is bright illumination in sunlight. The pupil reduces its size and reduces blur and increases the depth of focus. So this is also very important. Then sunlight exposure also helps your eye to make more vitamin D, which is very, very important. And exposure to bright light releases hormone dopamine, which controls the length of your eyeball. The shorter your eyeball is, then myopia might set in. So these are the reasons why sunlight protects you against myopia, reduces stress on the eye, it provides equal optical stimuli, then pupil size reduces, then vitamin D, and finally hormone, right? So these are the reasons why sunlight protects against myopia. Now he's also talking about the scale of this problem. If you talk globally, in 2000, there were 25% of global population that was suffering from this disease, and projections are that by 2030, 50% of global population would be suffering from myopia. Talking of India, so there has been a study by scientists from LV Prasad Eye Institute, and they predict that 64 million children between 5 to 15 years living in urban regions of the country alone will have myopia by the year 2050. So we have to take corrective steps because more than a genetic problem, it is a lifestyle problem. So we need to have proper solutions for this. Then page 13, NEET quota in Tamil Nadu. We've been discussing that, right? And I've told you about the concepts of vertical and horizontal quota. So this is about that only. Why Tamil Nadu is doing so? Again, we discussed that NEET and other examinations, they discriminate against state boards. So probably that is one of the reasons. Then this one, rethinking America's electoral system. Now this is important for your general awareness, or it could be important for this year's mains, but not for next year. So just to have an idea how this works, and this is basically applicable in your paper 2 comparison with other constitutional schemes. That is all. So we'll have an overview of this. I'll tell you the broad contours, right? And I've collected some images. You can read those infographics, right? Because they have unnecessarily complicated it. So let us get into it. So first, how the US Electoral College works. So basically voters, they do not directly vote for the president. They vote for electors. Now there are in all 538 electors, right? 100 are split evenly, that 2 come from every state. And rest 435, they are proportional to the state population, and 3 come from Washington DC. Now there's a difference between popular vote and this elector vote. So popular vote is like how many percentage of vote some party got, right? For example, Mr. Trump right now has somewhere about 47 to 48%, and Mr. Biden has the rest, right? Now, it could be possible in case of this system that a person who has less number of popular vote could be the president. For example, in his last term in 2016, Mr. Trump had less percentage of popular vote than Hillary Clinton, yet he became the president of USA because of these elector system. Right? So the candidates with most votes in a state wins the electors. So basically in every state there are electors. So they go with the popular vote. If a popular vote is favoring some candidate, then those electors also vote for that candidate. But there is a twist. There could be some electors who could be undecided and who could be voting for other people. Now, where do these electors come from? These electors are elected by both the Democrats and Republicans from amongst their parties, or there are some conditions. So they elect these electors, and these electors finally vote for the president. So this electoral college is 538, 100 split evenly, 2 per state, then 435 proportional representation according to population, and 3 from Washington DC. And these electors vote, and you need a magical number of 270 because you have to have absolute majority of the electors, right? And January 20 is the day when the president takes office for 4-year terms. So Mr. Trump still has till January 20, and let us see what he does. So this is what this is telling, what happens in an electoral college. I've already explained to you. To win the presidency, a candidate must win the majority of electoral vote. You read this is very, very simple. You're not going to have any problem, right? So what exactly is an electoral college? 538 party nominated electors who vote for the president. The electoral college is a group of party nominated electors selected to cast the official electoral votes for the next president. Each political party nominates their own group of 538 electors. These nominate electors pledge to vote for the party's nominee if candidate of their party wins the state they represent. Again, popular vote, right? In other words, the majority of people in your state vote for Trump. The Republican Electoral College wins the right to vote for Trump. You assume in good faith that the electors will keep their pledge to vote for Trump, but then there are undecided ones, right? Okay, so why are there 538? I've already told you 100 from states. There are 50 states in US, right? 435 proportional in congressional districts of the US and 3 from Washington DC. So 538. How are the electoral votes divided up by states? So 2 electoral votes are equal, rest in population, right? In proportion to the population according to the census data, right? Each district is intended to represent 1 by 435 of the US population. So the more populous a state in comparison to the others, the more electoral votes. The 435 congressional districts are reassigned every 10 years based on census data. Then this seems unnecessarily confusing. Why America use an electoral college? So the founding fathers in that explainer, they have named a few, right? You can read them for your history knowledge. Alexander Hamilton, and then there are others, right? So they wanted to maintain fair representation, but also to prevent a tyrannical dictator. So it could happen, for example, Hitler was very popular in Germany, so he could win elections later on. So this could happen. So to check any dictator from taking over power, they made this system of electors, which would act as a buffer between the people and the candidates, right? So do electors ever vote contrary to their pledge? Yes, sometimes, and they are called faithless elector. Has a candidate ever lost the popular vote but won the electoral vote? Yes. Mr. Trump, George W. Bush, these are the examples, right? Now, why is there a frustration over the electoral college today? So first he says that the system has surprisingly few voters that truly matter in an election. Why? Because apart from the swing states, the states are more or less fixed and they vote more or less on the same lines. So according to some estimates, only 10% or less than 10% of the total population actually determine the US presidential election. So this is a very scary prospect. Now, second one is that the contingency proceedings that are in place in case a candidate does not get clear majority or there is some problem. So the contingency proceedings are very complex and potentially self-defeating. How? Let us see. So whenever there is a dispute, the 12th amendment of the US Constitution is invoked. Then the election of the president becomes the responsibility of the House of Representatives, with each state delegation casting one vote. Now, had that happened in US, then Mr. Trump would have won. Why? Because more Republican states are there than the Democratic states, right? So this is the problem, that the candidate who has lost, he would still end up winning. Now, given that the red states outnumber blue states, in such a process might have led to Mr. Trump being confirmed by Congress as the president. Now, according to congressional report, only 2 presidential elections have been decided in the House in 1800 and 1824 respectively. Rest have been more or less decided outside, and there were 2 cases. You remember we discussed earlier. The only case in which the Supreme Court directly had to intervene was the 2000 election of George W. Bush, right? So we've been discussing that. So this is all about this article that you need to know. Now this one, interfaith marriages, conversion and the law. See, this is again for your generic knowledge, because UPSC has a tendency to not get into too much into very controversial subjects. So this is very, very controversial, but you should still have an idea about it. So first of all, what is the Special Marriage Act? So if people of different faith, they decide to get married, then they have to register their marriage under the Special Marriage Act, or one of the parties has to convert to the other religion. Now, why it has been in news? Because there have been some states that have been saying that they will make legislation against love jihad. Then there was a judgment by Allahabad High Court recently which said that you cannot convert your religion just for the sake of marriage, right? So all such interfaith marriages, they have to be registered under Special Marriage Act. Now for registering, first you have to go and file an application. So the man should be 21, woman should be 18, mentally capable. These are all generic conditions, right? And they should not be within any degree of prohibited relationship which is prescribed by their religion, right? Now they would give such notice to a marriage officer in the district, right? Now that marriage officer would be putting out a notice in the marriage bureau, right? That such and such people are going to marry, and then there's a time period within which people or the parents of both the people or the ones who are getting married can come and give their objection that we object to this union, right? So if this happens, then again the marriage officer has to conclude the inquiry within 30 days, right? And if the marriage does not take place within 3 months of the notice, then a fresh notice has to be issued. So again, an application, right? And like I told you that there could be objections, and the marriage officer has 30 days to inquire into it, right? So this is the problem with SMA, because anyone can object, then this could thwart marriage between interfaith couples, right? Now, what are the hurdles faced by couples? Number one, this process itself, it opens space for them to be exploited. Then publicity in the local registration office means that they get highlighted. There is threat to their lives, right? So Kerala registration department decided to discontinue this practice because there were some complaints. Now, what are the other options for registration of interfaith marriages, right? So basically this involves converting to the religion professed by the other. Now, again, there is a twist here, because for conversion into Islam and Christianity, there are formal means. But when you come into Hinduism, there is no ceremony, no means, right? The Hindu Marriage Act is also applicable to any person who is a convert or reconverted to Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Sikh or other religion. One more thing, if somebody marries under the Special Marriage Act and who is Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Jain, then he or she becomes severed from their family. That means their legal and other entitlements that they were get from their family, they are severed, right? Now, what are the laws against conversion for the sake of marriage? So there are existing laws. Himachal Pradesh has Freedom of Religion Act 2019 and Uttarakhand Freedom of Religion Act 2018. Both prohibit conversion by misrepresentation, force, fraud, undue influence, inducement, allurement, and by marriage. So these are there to protect the forced conversions. But marriage done solemnly for the purpose of conversion may be declared null and void by family code based on a suit by either party. Again, see, this is very difficult to prove. So this is about it. I've given you the broad contours. Important is the features, right? And the existing laws. Now coming to the Indian Express, again front page about Biden and Kamala Harris. Then just the headline, Sinha takes charge as CIC, 3 other ICs take oath. So we've been discussing about CIC and the 15 years of RTI Act, and there were vacancies. Now this person, Mr. Harshvardhan Kumar Sinha, has been appointed as CIC, and he was an ex-IFS officer, right? So vacancies have been filled. Then a year on, India goes back to space on observation satellite. We have discussed this in detail. The only thing that was missed out there was that originally it was supposed to be named RISAT 2BR2, right? Now it has been named EOS-01 because ISRO has moved to a new nomenclature, right? Then this one, survey cites good signs, high biodiversity in 49% of Ganga main river. So 12 years ago, Ganga was declared as the national river in India. There was 12th Ganga Utsav that happened recently, right? Now, there was a survey conducted by Wildlife Institute of India. So let us see what it is saying. So, according to this survey by Wildlife Institute of India, 49% stretch of that river now has high biodiversity. Now, biodiversity sightings have been of dolphins, seaboards, water snake, gharial among species returning to the main stem. Now, 10% of high biodiversity along national parks and sanctuaries. And what are those national parks and sanctuaries? Rajaji National Park in Uttarakhand, Hastinapur Wildlife Sanctuary in UP, and Vikramshila Gangetic Dolphin Sanctuary in Bihar. So these are important points for your PT examination. That it also tells us about Ganga, that Ganga and its tributaries flow through 11 states and cover 26.3% of country's total geographic area. Again, very important fact. But its main stem flows through 5 states: Uttarakhand, UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, and West Bengal. So that is why Ganga is very, very important river, right? Now the high biodiversity stretches have been identified in 6 zones. If you want, you can read them, right? And then it also tells us about the reasons for loss of biodiversity that happened earlier. Why that happened? Because of a change in rivers morphology due to construction of dams, barrages, bank alteration, agriculture and sand mining. So these are the reasons. In early 19th century, 10,000 Gangetic dolphins were estimated, which reduced to 3,526 by early 2000, disappearing entirely in some stretches. Now, good signs that there is revival of these high biodiversity species along Ganga, and 49% area is having high biodiversity. Then just the statement, integrated approach among tri-services key to dealing with threats, IAF chief. So Army chief has also said it, IAF chief has also said it, and the Navy chief has also said it. Then we have already discussed UAE announces major overhaul of Islamic laws, right? Then this one, IT ministry suggests infra status to data centers in draft policy. So the Ministry of IT MIT has suggested demarcation of special zones with necessary infrastructure such as road, running water and electricity to set up central parks, and these central parks would be like IT parks, right? And they should be given infrastructure status. That is what it is saying. In its new policy document, IT Ministry has suggested that the central government should accord infrastructure status to such data center parks, bringing them on par with other crucial sectors such as railway, roadways and power. This, the ministry said in its suggestion, will help in bringing the benefits of availing long-term credit from domestic and international lenders at easier terms. Very, very important point, right? So this is why they are seeking that status to get access to long-term lending. The new policy document also suggests that there should be single window time-bound clearance system for all approvals required to be set up a data center park. So this is about data center park. Number one, it should have all the necessary physical infrastructure like roads, running water, electricity, right? Number two, it should be given the status of infrastructure. Why? Because it could avail these benefits of long-term loan. And number three, there should be a single window time-bound and clearance system for all approvals required to be set up for a data park. The central and state governments shall formulate their respective schemes and guidelines detailing out fiscal and non-fiscal incentives in this sector to enable further expansion of data centers in the country. Apart from these, the ministry has also proposed incentives for those data center parks that use domestically manufactured hardware such as server and network devices. So this is again a boost for Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? And non-IT hardware such as mechanical, electrical, plumbing, cooling equipment, among others. So right now it is just a draft policy. So let us see where it goes, but good proposals. What are the proposals? Data center parks, according the status of infra, why to get loans, then single window clearance system, time bound manner, right? Center and state government should announce the incentives, and then there should be incentives for domestically manufactured hardware for both IT and non-IT components, right? So this is about it. So folks, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel. Also press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos, and please give us a thumbs up if you liked our videos. Also connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone, and please connect with us on our Telegram page where you can access the PDFs of the videos that I'll be posting daily, right? So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.